So now we've heard a little bit from the working with agency lands perspective. We've heard planning out your seed mix with NRCS. Now Dan Nelson, private lands biologist with South Dakota Game Fish and Parks, is going to give us his take on seed mixing for private lands, wildlife projects.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, like Josh said, my name is Dan Nelson. I'm a private lands habitat biologist with the Game Fish and Parks located out of Watertown. So I'm also in the northeast part of the state. You know, I will say the last two talks, there's going to be a lot, I should say some repetitiveness between it. When I first started working for the department, I actually worked with Owen a lot. So I feel like I share a lot of his similarities when it comes to management, you know, and if that's something you guys don't like, definitely blame Owen because it's not my fault. And then working with Joe and Ryan a lot now going forward. I've kind of adapted on the private lands, some of their policies and things they do just because I work with private landowners as well. So as we go through this, like I said, you probably will see some repetitiveness going through it. Where does, you know, private land staff fit into this whole mix of grassland establishment and programs in general? So the main goal, I would say for me, is to kind of approach it on a non-pressured approach of providing technical assistance for landowners or anybody interested in a program. You know, when it comes to these things, you can see the program assistant, there's a lot of stuff going on when it comes to these things, and it's hard to understand what programs exist, which ones are you eligible for, the requirements that go into them. So one of the things I strive to do is work on understanding them programs better, letting those landowners know what exists, what might be a good fit, and then ultimately letting them decide if there's something they're interested in and want to know more about. You know, and this comes back to, I'll say, just like these programs, when you go meet with landowners or do anything to that nature, I always like to bring a party. If Joe and Ryan is available, we try to all go out there because, once again, they're going to know the programs ultimately better than I am, but you can also brainstorm and get some other ideas going out of the deal. So Game Fish and Parks does offer some programs. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of our programs aren't really catered toward the annual payments. Most of these are the incentivization to help cost share to get something on the ground. But for the sake of this school, we're going to focus on the grassland establishment stuff. We do have two programs within the Game Fish and Parks. One is designed to be more of the grassland setting where maybe less diverse plantings. We're talking a little bit higher acres. And then the other one's more focused on pollinator, brood habitat, things to that nature. And the nice thing I will say too with these programs is they're meant to complement some of the other programs that exist. So as we're navigating these things, you know, if something doesn't meet cropping history, you know, this might be a good option that we can get a landowner into, or maybe part of it does and part of it doesn't. It still fits that role. And then on top of it, I'll talk about a little bit later, but at some of our funding sources, we partner with other agencies and NGOs, and this gives us the ability to kind of commingle our programs with theirs and still incentivize some of the payments. So flexibility of programs. Like I mentioned, with the Game Fish and Park stuff, I guess one of our main goals is we try to stay flexible in the sense of fill in a niche or a void that may exist to help get some habitat on the landscape. Being a wildlife, I guess, directed agency, we really try to promote something that's going to be beneficial for the wildlife. And that's not just habitat, that's also working lands that are done properly. So as you can see here, we're not always restricted to cropping history. I should say we're not. We don't have to worry about sign-up periods for most of our programs, and we don't have batching periods when we come to most of the stuff. Seeding rate limits, you guys have heard a lot of different stuff. We're in the ballpark of kind of where everybody else is at. I would say on a lot of my mixes, I try to shoot for that 30 seeds per square foot, sometimes higher, sometimes less. You know, when I work with private landowners, a lot of times the diversity is a kind of a big step for them to take just because the thought of what might it bring. Is there going to be additional weed pressure? What's the difference in identifying a weed versus a forb? So sometimes just, you know, those baby steps to get in, maybe still have a little bit more grass in the mix, but still contain a number of different forbs is the way to do it. We have that ability to kind of cater our mixes as we need to kind of meet that landowner's needs. So they can be used, like I mentioned earlier, standalone or to enhance another program. And then seed sources. So this is something I'm not sure that'll get talked about a lot, or I think it's going to, is we do like to see semi-local ecotypes, knowing that most of them are going to be cultivars, but we're open to however that landowner wants to proceed. If he's got his own seed source, we're open to that type of things, whether it's bulk harvest or adding additional supplemental seed is A-OK too. The only thing we got to worry about with our programs is we have a limit of how many dollars an acre that we're going to pay or reimburse. So, and then individual project flexibility. So one thing about our programs that I find really cool is if we have somebody that's trying to be very innovative, they have a really neat idea, something kind of off the wall, going to provide some educational opportunities down the road as well, we have the ability to tweak our programs to kind of fit that project and still help cost share it. So tools, like I mentioned, there's a variety of tools that we do utilize to do some of our stuff. One of the ones that we have is our grant partnerships. So when we partner with some of the agencies or NGOs that allows us to use a research-based approach to identify areas and species of greatest concern for conservation. And the biggest thing that I would say takeaway behind this is it allows us to target that conservation practice where it will have the biggest positive impact. And you can see here, this is a model showing of the grouse density based on the spatial habitat suitability that the department developed, and then we utilize these models to apply for grants to focus those efforts on these areas highlighted by the thunderstorm map. And then here's just another one that we use for occupancy models to kind of show and reflect that same thing where we use different species. So I think in there's still the prairie grouse, I think we have bobolinks and chestnut collared longspur. So a tool that's been mentioned multiple times, I would say that it works really, really well for a lot of our programs. It's Web Soil Survey. Super easy website to navigate. There's a lot of information on there. There's a lot of stuff that I'm still learning and figuring out. I would encourage anybody that has not done so, go on, check it out for yourself. You know, the nice thing about it, you can start learning your own soils, figuring out, like many have mentioned already, is something going to grow? Will it sustain itself? You know, that's not only going from a local ecotype potentially, but is the soil compatible for that plant to sustain long term? And then, as mentioned as well, you know, is a one seed mix gonna do the whole site, or is this something you got to look at doing multiple mixes to plant them in the appropriate soils? And then I should mention, if you ever want, if you go to the website, you want to get started, you can see that green button says start. You hit that green button, this is going to pop up. It'll allow you to select your area of interest and proceed to different land classifications and information on your soils. So additional tools. This is a tool that was developed by SDSU and SDSU Extension. We call it the puddle layer. We use it through ARC Pro. And what it does, it's a tool that allows us to identify potentially undisturbed ground or essentially native land that has never been broken. They utilize a combination of FSA maps or data layers and USDA maps and imagery to kind of just give the best hope of what is potentially still native. I'd encourage everybody, just like anything, nothing is perfect, so go out, do a site evaluation, inspect what's actually out there, and that'll help kind of give us a determination of where do we need to start. Is it going to be a full restoration? Is this site still native prairie where maybe management is the tool to kind of get stuff coming back? So seeding tool, I default and use the NRCS tool. It's a tool that's, because I work a lot with USDA, it works well. We can cross seedings back and forth and utilize the same sheet. Pretty simple, straightforward to utilize. You know, it's kind of been talked about, so I won't go into crazy detail, but there is a difference on how the Game Fish and Parks approaches sod seedings versus crop seedings. Sod seedings, knowing that there's likely already a very well-established stand of Kentucky bluegrass and brome grass, we tend to be more aggressive on the species that we plant, such as aggressive forbs, the warm season, you know, aggressive type grasses as well. And then the crop field is slightly different because we're hoping we're starting with a little bit more of a clean slate. We have a tendency to put a little bit more diversity out there, hoping it's going to help ensure that that seeding is successful and can keep some of those non-natives at bay. So this kind of comes into that annuals, biennials versus perennials. I think it's very important to have a lot of these in your mix, and because of that, you're going to have them establishing at different times. So the common saying is, with grass plantings, the first year it sleeps, the second year it creeps, and the third year it leaps. I think this is going to give you an option where those annuals are going to establish fairly quickly. You're going to see some results and something coming up, and then as things progress, your biennials and perennials are going to start taking over. You know, and the big take home here too is high diversity tends to equal higher resilience when it comes to a seeding. And then with the objective and management, you know, that just comes into play of how we're designing a seed mix. What is the individual going to do for management going forward? Is it more wildlife focused? Is it going to be part of a working land system? We tend to cater our mixes according to what their objective is going to be long term. So, and this is just a zoomed in. You can see, as everybody's talking about, this does give you the pure live seed column as well as the pounds per acre, and I try to focus on the pure live seed. I think it just, or seeds per square foot rather, because I think it gives you a better opportunity to fine tune your mixes, add a little bit more diversity, still keep them costs down. So the other thing I really want to talk about more than anything that hopefully is slightly different from some of the others is the wildlife consideration. Since we are a wildlife heavy agency, diversity is king when it comes to wildlife. There's no question. If you can put diversity on the landscape, your wildlife is always going to thrive and tend to have a better functionality in the system. So, there's a difference of opinion as well. So we have succession, and succession starting at that annual weedy species followed up through that seeding until it gets established. From a wildlife perspective, annual weedy species are great. So not only do they provide a great source for insects and pollinators, but it also has that seed value come fall. So they're a great thing. But what I'll tell you is, just like anything, when we're working through these and giving recommendations, we're telling you not to get out of compliance. So if you're into CRP or if you're into a program that requires you to do certain things, don't just say, well, the biologist told me that the weeds are fine and I'm going to leave them. And I say weeds, these are non-noxious weeds that I'm referring to when it comes to these type of things, but weeds are actually very beneficial for wildlife. And my interpretation of a seeding, and when you're doing a post-planting evaluation, is if you can walk through that seeding, you can still see your feet, you can still see the bare ground. I don't think it's weedy enough that it's really going to have a long-lasting negative impact on that planting. Nesting and brood rearing habitat. So we talk a lot about diversity, and the more diversity you can have in that planting is going to drastically benefit nesting and brood rearing. As pheasants nest, if they're not nesting in good habitat or good brood habitat, they're going to move those chicks to where it would be good brood habitat. The benefit to doing something that's already diverse is those chicks are going to stay right where they're hatched. As you can see in that upper right picture, that's kind of what we're going for. It's something that's going to provide, that open understory and some canopy cover as well. So kind of going into the other aspect of wildlife is also, white-tailed deer, at least in the Northeast, that's our common deer species over there. And a lot of people, when they come to us wanting to do habitat development, they also have deer in mind. Diverse plantings are great for fawning habitat, and then the other thing to think about with that diversity comes a lot of different browse for deer. So now the lactating does tend to require a lot of nutritional content, and you can get that by having this. And anybody that's a big deer hunter, I try to encourage them by having that diversity. You're not only going to obtain some winter cover value to that, but you're also going to have the forward component that's going to provide browse. So come hunting season, hopefully those deer are going to bed and get up and feed on the same property, because they have shown that deer will get up roughly 5 times a day to feed. So if you can keep them on their property, well, that's even better. So grasses, just kind of running through some of the difference on grasses, cool season to warm season. So the benefits to cool season grasses in a diverse mix is it provides early spring green up. And some of that's going to also provide that enhancement and concealment. So not only are you relying on residual from last year, but then you get this year's growth that's also going to help conceal wildlife. And then there's potential for some food or forage value out of them green shoots. And then the microclimate control. And this is something I'm going to talk about a little bit in the next slide, how that's important for pheasant chicks. The warm season grass component, the biggest factor behind there is it provides a lot of vertical structure. So when you're thinking about, kind of thick, tall, rank, potential thermal value type cover, your tall warm season grasses tend to provide that. And in moderation, they won't tend to take over a planting, as you can see in that picture there. And then the other important thing to remember is when it comes to reproduction in wildlife, it's a process leading up to the spring. And if you can get wildlife through the winter in good body condition, they're more likely to be more reproductively successful. And then on top of it, they're going to have healthier offspring. So whether that's pheasant chicks or fawns. So the forward component. So this is where I kind of wanted to talk about pheasant chicks a little bit and how important it is to have this diversity in there. Additionally, it complements spring green up, but pheasant chicks are precocial. And what that means is when they hatch with their eyes open, and within a day they're moving around feeding on their own. having something that's diverse, that has a lot of forward component, that is still open underneath and has good canopy cover above is going to allow them small pheasant chicks to move around and find insects. You know, it is listed, anytime we can do sequential flowering, so flowering throughout the entire year, you're just going to continue to produce that insect factory and keep those insects there for the pheasant chicks. It's back to the microclimate. So within the first couple of weeks of a pheasant chick's life, it's not very good at regulating its own temperature, and you get them kind of May conditions where the temperatures are fluctuating a little bit. It's not uncommon to see really cold temperatures, which might in turn actually end up killing your pheasant chicks because they just can't thermal regulate very well. So this microclimate that's kind of created by these diverse plantings actually do a really good job at helping them survive and make it through those temperature swings. So grazing considerations. So since this isn't really a grazing school, I just want to at least mention this on there because this is something the department truly believes in is, you know, I love the saying, if it's good for the herd, it's good for the bird. And the concept behind that is if you're doing a system that benefits the grass, benefits the cattle, it's going to benefit wildlife as a whole. And then I just have a couple of graphs on there that kind of demonstrate the different height structures and how it benefits different wildlife. So it does go to show that grazing on a landscape can do a lot of good things. So with that, the final slide is rely on your resources. So as many people have alluded to, your partnerships are greatly important with the professionals, the people you trust. I would encourage everybody, make sure you're reaching out to them if you have questions. And there's no secret, there tends to be a lot of turnover within the agencies. And I would encourage you, bring those new agency staff or NGO staff in underneath your wing, teach them about the things that you know, show them the resources you have, and just kind of continue that education and knowledge that's out there.